All right, welcome to another Rotoden NBA podcast. I'm Blaine Robinson, joined by Alexander Lisgaris and John Ryan, and we're going to talk about the playoffs in general, but focus and analysis on round one. And then we're going to get into a couple other topics. But gentlemen, and Alexander, I'll start with you. What just jumps out to you initially when you see these round one matchups? What sort of catches your eye, or what are you most intrigued about?
Well, for me, I think one of the more intriguing matchups is Milwaukee and Boston. I think there's a lot of mystique behind that just because, the Celtics are the amount of attrition that they've gone through and just all the injuries that they have. You would expect that maybe Milwaukee could have a chance in maybe 6 games, or maybe I think probably they'd have to push it to 7. But I think Boston, the way they've played without Kyrie and how they've really played without Gordon Hayward all season, I think there's still a tough matchup, and I would still favor them over Milwaukee, even though, Milwaukee has Giannis and Jabari is coming back, and he's kind of coming back into form. So I think that's probably the most intriguing matchup. I don't see a lot of people talking about it, maybe because of all the injuries that Boston has sustained. There's not really much star power in that matchup. But I think, if we can get to see what Giannis can do on the big stage in the playoffs, we saw how he did last year against Toronto. Now we'll see if he can build upon that and maybe try to lead Milwaukee to the second round.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right about that matchup sort of flying under the radar. I think, the casual fans, they love high scoring, they love superstars, and with Boston's injuries, especially Kyrie, and we've known Hayward's out for the season, they don't have those big time names. And Milwaukee, they have probably the biggest name and probably the best player on the floor. But I know John takes the angle of the coaching and the style that Milwaukee runs could give them some trouble because Boston's really fundamental and really well coached. John, what do you have? What are your thoughts on that matchup?
Yeah, the Bucks have probably one of the most talented rosters in the East. On paper alone, they could rival anyone in the East. But off season, they've been hindered by their coaching. They've had really basic offensive steps. They run a lot of iso ball similar to OKC. They run the clock down, and so it's like 6 seconds on the shot clock and give it to either Bledsoe or Giannis and see what he can do. But having Brad Stevens on the other side gives Boston the edge that I still like, even though the Bucks may be the more talented roster with all the injuries the Celtics have dealt with. So I do like the Celtics in that matchup.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point, and you guys have both heard me talk time and time again about any matchup with San Antonio this year. I sort of give that respect to Pop, and they may not have the talent they've had in years past, and without Kawhi, it's going to be a tough road for them. But Pop, he just gives you that edge. So I think that's a great point about Coach Stevens. John, what stands out to you round one? Is there a particular matchup you're looking at that intrigues you?
More so than just one individual matchup. This season, more than past, the first round matchups seem a lot more even. There's a lot less certainty that stands out to me. A lot of these series could go at least 6 games, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some upsets, which is usually unusual in the first round. So I like how it's going to be a lot more balanced, hopefully, at least on the surface.
Yeah, when I look at the matchups, I tend to agree with you. I think the only series where I would probably tell you that I have it not going at least 6 games for sure would be Rockets and Timberwolves. The Rockets swept the season series 4-0, and I just think that they're too offensively explosive, and that coupled with the fact that Minnesota's not, a typical Tom Thibodeau defense, I think that Houston at most beats them in 5. But when you look at it, I think San Antonio has definitely the clout to take Golden State to 6 games minimum. Utah and OKC is probably going 7. Portland, New Orleans, I think everyone has that going 7. Cleveland and the Pacers, that could go deep. Toronto and Washington, let's talk about that for a second, because it's not far-fetched to say that even though Toronto's the 1 seed and their 2 best players are Lowry and DeRozan, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that they might have the second best backcourt in that series. What are you guys' thoughts on the Wall, Beal versus Lowry-DeRozan matchup?
Yeah, so I have the Raptors winning in 6, but paired with their recent playoff struggles, losing their first game in the first matchup 9 consecutive years, and the fact that John Wall and Bradley Beal are one of the best backcourt duos in the league certainly makes the series intriguing. Is John Wall healthy? Is a big question. He still hasn't been playing back-to-back. He's still recovering from his injury. So as long as he's 100%, the Wizards have a fair chance. But I still like the Raptors in 6.
Alexander, what about you? What do you think about that matchup, and specifically Beal and Wall matching up with Lowry and DeRozan?
Yeah, well, like John said, I'm going to take the Raptors in 6 because I just don't think that the Wizards have really shown much this year to believe that they could get even past the first round. I think for John Wall, he needs to find more consistency. I know he's coming off of, knee surgery, and he missed a month or two. But I see a lot of inconsistencies in his game, and especially his attacking. And, there was a huge example in that Cleveland game where he was coming down, the Wizards were down by 1, and he was driving to the hoop, and instead of, taking the easy layup, he passed out, and Cedi Osman got the steal because he was afraid LeBron was coming back.
Yeah.
I don't think DeRozan will be that scared. DeRozan has shown all year that, he's an improved shooter, and especially his playmaking. He's been averaging 4 or 5 assists, and he's had multiple games where he's had well over 6 or 7 assists. So although the Raptors always kind of seem to hit a wall when it comes to the playoffs, especially their 2 superstars, I think DeRozan will be able to do enough to make up for Kyle Lowry's inconsistencies, and I just don't think that Washington really has enough to get past Toronto.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said for a team that's constantly harped on and nitpicked and under the microscope, especially in the postseason. I think Toronto, this really could be the year where they want to put a lot of that noise to rest and really come out strong, not only in Game 1, but not let this series extend past 6 games, as both of you guys have predicted. So we've talked a little bit about 2 of the matchups in the East. We've talked about Wizards, Raptors, and Bucks, Celtics. Let's move over to what's catching a lot of people's attention is an interesting matchup stylistically between the up-tempo Sixers and the grinded-out Miami Heat. What are your thoughts on that initially, John?
I can't imagine the 76ers losing. They have too much talent. Ben Simmons is a generational talent. As long as Embiid does come back to series, which he's expected to in Game 2, the 76ers just have too much talent to not lose the series. But I could see the Miami Heat coming out and winning Game 1 just based off the fact that the 76ers have very little experience in the playoffs. J.J. Redick is one of the few veterans on that team who does have experience, but really the rest of the rotation has no experience in the playoffs, so that'll be interesting to see. But, Ben Simmons, Embiid, they're going to be too much. Markelle Fultz looks good. I can't imagine the Heat coming out and upsetting them.
Yeah, and that's a good point you make, because Game 1 is really the prime opportunity for Miami to jump on that series and maybe put a little bit of doubt into the Sixers. They've been riding high for the last month, coming in on a 16-game winning streak. And I think that Game 1, with definitely no Embiid for Game 1, presents Miami with a unique opportunity to steal home court right off the bat. I mean, you look at that Sixers roster, and they definitely have some solid pieces, but without the 1-2 punch of both Simmons and Embiid in the lineup, this could be a case where Eric Spoelstra, and he's shown championship pedigree before, challenges James Johnson, and Justice Winslow to really, really be physical and take Ben Simmons out of that game. And maybe if they can cut off the head of the snake, they can capitalize early and be up a game and steal home court before Embiid returns. What are your thoughts on that matchup, Alexander?
I think for Miami, definitely Game 1 is probably the most important game all season, obviously being a playoff game, but especially with Embiid out, they have to capitalize as much on that as they can, because I feel like Embiid and Whiteside will really cancel each other out. I think that's the cancel-out matchup, and even it'll be to the disadvantage of Miami, especially because Whiteside, he's very unpredictable. I don't know how he'd do it in a playoff matchup, especially against Joel Embiid when Joel is kind of the irritant, and Hassan can get really kind of ticked off and read really easy. So I think Miami needs to do everything they can game one to try and come out and steal home court. And I think, a lot of people believe that this matchup is kind of like one-sided and that Philadelphia will easily win like maybe 6 or even 5 games. But Miami has some good pieces. Josh Richardson, I feel like he doesn't get talked about as much as a really good 3-and-D guy, and he's really been one of the best defensive players this year who really could make it on first team all defense. They also have Kelly Olynyk, who's tough, and they have Wayne Ellington coming off like an insane year with shooting. He's been on fire all year, the man with the golden arm. So I think as much as people are blowing this out of proportion to be kind of like a one-sided series, I think Miami definitely has a chance, and especially with D Wade back to lead the troops. So I think Philly will end up winning, but it will not be as close as people think.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that the series, at minimum is going 6 games. I just can't see Philadelphia winning this series in 5 games. And with the championship experience of Coach Spoelstra and Dwayne Wade and the relative inexperience of Brett Brown and Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid, I just don't think you can just say that Philadelphia is just going to just run over them. So I definitely agree with that going long. And then finally, the last series in the East with probably still the best player in the world, LeBron James. It's interesting because the Pacers beat the Cavaliers 3 out of 4 games this season. Oladipo has really taken a step up, and the pieces around Oladipo are, I don't want to say clearly better than Cleveland's supporting cast, but Thaddeus Young, Corey Joseph, Darren Collison, Bogdanovich, Lance Stevenson, Miles Turner, they've all been pretty steady. Sabonis even, they've been pretty steady this season. And so I think that if all goes well, this could be a long series if the supporting cast around Oladipo outplays the supporting cast around LeBron James. What are your guys' initial thoughts on that series?
Yeah, I think that Indiana is going to give Cleveland a lot of issues. Obviously, Cleveland has the best player by far in the series with LeBron. But ever since the big trade, multiple trades, the trade deadline where Cleveland basically flipped their entire roster over. At first, in the first few games, people thought that, this was really what the team needed. This is what, LeBron needed to get some fresh faces, to get some young guns on the team. But, very soon after that, it seemed to fall off really bad. When you look at LeBron's supporting cast, Rodney Hood, George Hill, Larry Nance, I just don't think that they're going to fit in well with LeBron, especially in the playoffs, and especially with the experience they have. Larry Nance never made the playoffs. Jordan Clarkson's never made the playoffs. So I think with how Indiana is playing now Oladipo is leading them, I think they'll definitely push Cleveland to 6, maybe even a 7th game. But in the end, Cleveland has LeBron, and I don't see LeBron ever losing in the first round for a really long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, John.
I do obviously think this Cavaliers team is one of the most vulnerable that LeBron has ever been a part of. But I don't think that the Pacers are equipped to take them down. I have the Cavs in 5. I do think Oladipo and company can steal a game. But I just can't imagine LeBron, Kevin Love, and the experience that they have let the Pacers bring them to any more than 5. Obviously, LeBron is still the best player in the world. His playoff mode is on a different level than anyone. And what he should be able to do to the Pacers should outweigh what defensive deficiencies they have. So even though the games might be high scoring, I can't imagine LeBron and Love not being able to take care of the Pacers rather quickly.
Yeah, interesting. I'm glad you brought up the defensive efficiency because that's where I was going to go. And I actually see this being a more difficult series for the Cavaliers than you do. I think it's a very important thing that Cleveland is 29th in defense this year, second last only to the Phoenix Suns, who will be picking first overall in June's draft. And when I've watched Cleveland this year, and I've watched them quite a bit, it just seems like there is no resistance at the rim. You beat your guy off the dribble, and you're going for a layup or a dunk with very, very little resistance. Tristan Thompson is a shell of himself. Kevin Love isn't necessarily a rim protector. And so I see this going the distance, honestly. I believe that this will go 7 games, and I have Cleveland coming out because LeBron in elimination games is just a totally different LeBron. But I just think that with the way that Oladipo can score the ball and the way that Thaddeus Young can be a complementary piece, and Lance Stevenson being an X factor, you know what you're going to get from Darren Collison's steady play at the point guard position. I have this going 7 games, just purely because of the lack of defense. I don't see Cleveland flipping a switch from 82 regular season games to game 1 of the postseason. So that's my thoughts on that. Let's move out west now and talk about tomorrow's first game, and that's between the Spurs and the Warriors. Alexander, I know that you like the Warriors in this series, but do you have any sort of pause for concern, knowing that one, San Antonio probably has the coaching advantage, and when you give Popovich that much time on one team, he tends to do pretty well. And then the fact that the Warriors have struggled in the last month. What are your initial thoughts on that series?
Well, obviously, as you said, San Antonio has the coaching advantage by far, in my opinion, with Pop. And with the Warriors' struggles, you would think that there would be a cause for concern. But when you look at it from a base standpoint of the Warriors have Kevin Durant, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green, and San Antonio really only has LaMarcus Aldridge. That's the only really star talent that they have on the court right now without Kawhi. I think if you add Kawhi in, it's a completely different story, especially with Steph out. But I just feel that even though Golden State has struggled, San Antonio has struggled a lot through the second half of the season. And just watching them in their offense, they really don't have an offense. I know you guys definitely know this, that the kind of stigma with the Spurs is that they've always been a ball movement team, like ball movement over player movement, passing, incredible scoring offense. But this year it's been completely different. It's been a really slow down offense without Kawhi, and with Manu and Tony Parker getting older and not being able to play as many minutes as they used to. The offense really this year has just been give it to LaMarcus and see what he can do, and we'll go from there. And I don't blame Pop, but there just hasn't been a lot of talent on court as compared to last year. Especially with Rudy Gay missing significant minutes. So even the point that they're at right now, even making the playoffs is a miracle. So I think Golden State's going to come out of here in like 5 or 6 games.
Yeah,
probably closer to 5.
Yeah, I think, and I've mentioned this to John in the past. Sometimes when I evaluate series, I ask myself, can the best player on the underdog team be the best player on the floor? And I'm not sure that LaMarcus Aldridge can be the best player on the floor for 4 out of 7 games. I mean, that's just a tall task, especially when you have a defensive-minded guy like Draymond Green. I just think that KD is probably going to be the best player on the floor more often than not. And if LaMarcus Aldridge is the best player on the floor, it'll be for 1 or 2 games in San Antonio, but definitely not enough to lead them over, like you said, the more talented Warriors. John, what are your thoughts on that series?
Yeah, so obviously the Spurs have Popovich, and there's no denying what he can do in a series. But the fact is that the Spurs have no offensive identity. They have no one who can really create shots on their own. They rely on Manu Ginobili way too much at his age. DeJounte Murray is so too unpredictable. Tony Parker is a shell of himself. So I can't imagine the Spurs winning more than 1 game in the series. I wouldn't be surprised if the Warriors swept them. They have struggled on the defensive end, but with the Spurs' deficiencies on the offensive end, I think that kind of equals out each other. And the fact that KD, Draymond, Klay, Quinn Cook has been playing well. Just the fact that they should be able to outscore the Spurs rather easily, and they'll kick it up a notch. I don't think the Warriors that we saw in the last 3 weeks of the regular season are the Warriors that will come out. But there is no denying that Steph Curry is the most valuable player on that team, and they are different without Curry. So
Yeah.
it is important to get out of this series quickly, get some rest, and let Curry come back for round 2, and they should be the title favorite.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it sounds like we all have a ton of respect for Pop, and myself as a coach away from this journalism stuff. I definitely, you can learn a lot from that guy, and it really proves the point that you don't always have to have the most talented group in the world to be a successful team, and he pretty much epitomizes that year in and year out. But let's go to tomorrow night's game, which is the Pelicans in Portland to play the Blazers, and what's probably going to be a fascinating series if you like offense and star power, and also could be a long series. John, what do you think about that series?
This is probably going to be my favorite series to watch, just in the fact that there's no favorite in this series. The Trailblazers have Lillard, McCollum, and Nurkic, so they're going to get their points. They're going to compete. They're going to steal some games. But the Pelicans have the best player on the floor in Anthony Davis. I think in his first playoff appearance, he should be able to take over games. Drew Holiday is a really good player. Just the fact that he gets paid like a superstar player doesn't take away from the impact he has on the game. And I think he could shut down McCollum for stretches. And if he, depending on who he guards, he could slow down Lillard too. But the fact that they have Rondo, and in the playoffs he's a different player, I do like the Pelicans in this series as long as they can get some shooting outside of Davis.
Yeah, that's a good point, definitely. Alexander, what about you?
I'm going to take Portland in the series. I think, every year Dame kind of has this chip on his shoulder, in the past years of not being named an all-star. And I just think that with the role that he's been on in the second half of the season, which many can deem All-NBA worthy or All-NBA first team worthy, actually. I'm not sure how Anthony Davis' supporting cast, will fare in this series. If they would have had DeMarcus Cousins, then I probably would have gone New Orleans in the series, just because Nurkic can't handle everything down low like that. I mean, it is to be able to guard Anthony Davis. So I think it'll really be dependent on the supporting cast. I think Portland's bench kind of runs weak, but also New Orleans' bench to an extent. But New Orleans has Rondo, who has incredible playoff experience, and Anthony Davis being one of the 10 best players on the planet, maybe even like 5 best for some people. But I just think that the combination of Dame and CJ and having Nurk down low, in conjunction with a few bench pieces. I think a lot of people don't give Shabazz Napier a lot of credit. He's come back and he's really had a solid year with the Blazers. I think he's found his niche in the NBA. When he was with Miami, he wasn't really used correctly. And Orlando is just a bad situation for really any player right now. I think he's found his spot in Portland, and I think I'm going to take Portland in probably 7 games.
Yeah, I also have Portland in 7 games. I think this is a very even series. I mean, razor-thin margins. I just give Portland the edge because if there's a Game 7 in the Moda Center, Portland's already a tough place to play, but I just see that building rocking for a Game 7. And Damian Lillard, capping his best season by not losing in the first round. So I definitely have Portland in 7 as well. I do think the bench dynamic is very interesting. On the one hand, we all know that rotations shrink in the playoffs and the bench guys don't play as many minutes, but the bench really could tip the scales in either team's direction. I mean, I don't really particularly like either team's bench. Coming off the bench for Portland, you have guys like Napier, Connaughton, Zach Collins. You also have Evan Turner, I guess, who's he'll probably be coming off the bench at some point because Harkless is expected to return within the next few games. But I just really don't like that bench. But then in New Orleans, you don't really give them an advantage either with Darius Miller, Ian Clark. I don't really like either team's bench pieces. I think this is going to be a starters-heavy series. where the stars decide it. So that should be something interesting to watch. If one of the benches really do start to play well, that could really tip the scales in the series. But let's move on to Houston and Minnesota. Does anybody give Minnesota even the slightest chance?
No. And I love Tibbs, I love Jimmy and D Rose and Taj, but Houston is on another level right now. And I think James Harden and Chris Paul have reached the points in their career where they're ready to just prove everyone wrong. They have a lot of doubters, especially in the playoffs. Chris Paul's never made it past the second round, and especially what happened with James Harden last year in San Antonio in Game 6. I think they teamed up for a reason. Chris Paul teamed up with James Harden for a reason, and I just don't think Minnesota's going to be able to stop them, especially with the way they've been defending this year. So I'm going to take Houston in a sweep, 4 games.
All right. There you have it. First sweep of this analysis. John, what about you?
Yeah, I also have the Rockets in a sweep, but I do think Minnesota has a chance to at least slow down the Rockets somewhat. If they put Jimmy Butler on Harden for stretches, I think that could slow him down. At least make the games interesting. I can't imagine the Rockets losing it all. I think they're out to prove something this year, but I think Minnesota could steal a game if they do defend well, but that is yet to remain seen this season at least.
Yeah, I think if somebody had told us this would be a playoff matchup before the season, we probably all would have maybe had this as a 7-game series. We weren't sure how the Harden-Chris Paul dynamic would work. And then, when you look on paper, you tend to think that Minnesota might have a little bit more talent, The headliners in Houston are CP and Harden, but Cat, Teague, Jimmy Butler, Andrew Wiggins, we really thought that was going to be firepower all season long, and it didn't pan out that way. Jimmy Butler in a lot of series can be the best player, but in this series it's almost going to be impossible for him to outplay Harden 4 times, so I don't think that's realistic. But I do think Minnesota maybe sneaks a game at home in Minneapolis, so I have Houston in 5, but like you guys said, I just think that they're on a mission, and they're not going to want to be fooling around going 6 or 7 games early on in the playoffs, because that rest as you get deeper in the playoffs can be a huge factor, and it could work to the Rockets' benefit if, say, the Warriors have to go a couple long series and Houston can sort of coast through in 4 or 5. And then maybe the last series we've yet to talk about, and maybe one of the most fascinating. I know we all like Portland and New Orleans, but the Utah OKC series, which has a ton of questions and what seems like a ton of possibilities for how this series could play out. What are your initial thoughts on that series, John?
I'm actually probably surprisingly taking Oklahoma City in 4 games.
Wow.
The Jazz, I do like Quinn Snyder is a terrific coach. Rudy Gobert is probably the defensive player of the year. And Donovan Mitchell is incredible for a rookie. But the fact that they're so young, Donovan Mitchell has never been there and is relied upon so heavily for his scoring. And Rudy Gobert, he's a great defender. He's going to slow down Oklahoma City, but he's not an offensive threat at all. So I can't imagine Utah with the stakes raised in a high-pressure situation, playing the talent Oklahoma City has, even stealing 1 game. I don't think the series will be very close. I think that Oklahoma City has been playing better as of late. What they did in Houston, both teams were trying to win, obviously, but it was more meaningful for Oklahoma City. But they played really well. Melo played really well. Russell Westbrook has started to shoot less, where his role at least seems like on the surface. He's stopped taking as many threes. And if he can do that, attack the rim, get Gobert in foul trouble, I think they should be able to defend well enough to not let the Jazz even steal 1 game.
Interesting. Very, very, very bold prediction. Alexander, what about you? How do you analyze that series?
I don't think this series is going to be as lopsided as John thinks. Although Oklahoma City has Russ, Paul George, Melo. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Utah, which kind of sounds surprising because Donovan Mitchell has been getting all this buzz. The other day, I read a stat that said that at some point this season, Phoenix and Utah had the same amount of wins, 14 wins, or it may have been 16. And obviously that was expected at the beginning of the season when Gobert had missed a month, and then he came back and he missed another month with the knee issues. But since that point, one team, the Suns, went 5-35 to finish the season, and Utah finished the season 32-10. So I think with Gobert, this team is a completely different monster. And especially if you look at the Jazz's record with Gobert as a starter over the past few years, it's very, very good. I think they've won over 65% of their games with Gobert starting. So this team is not as bad as people think they are compared to the Thunder in this series. But at the end of the day, I have to go with the team that has Russell Westbrook, Paul George, Carmelo against a team who has Donovan Mitchell as their best player, or the second best player. But I just think Oklahoma's star power is really going to will them. Not necessarily their bench, because I think that Utah has actually a better bench than Oklahoma City. You know, with Dante Exum coming back and playing really well. You know, with Jay Crowder coming off the bench. But I'm going to have to go with Oklahoma City. But the series isn't going to be as lopsided as many people think.
Yeah, I
take OKC in 6 games.
Yeah, I actually think this is going to be a 7-game series. I really believe that, and I think that Oklahoma City will win the 7th game on their home floor. The reason I think that is for a variety of reasons. Obviously, I watch a ton of Thunder games, and they're not consistent. I cannot see them putting together 4 straight games of just beautiful basketball where they're doing enough to be a team that's as sound as the Jazz are, really. The Jazz aren't flashy and they're not going to score a bunch, but they're just really sound. And, you talked about their record since the time that they had the same record as the Suns. Even more recently, since March 1st, the Jazz are 17-4 and finished the season with the number 1 defensive rating. And when you play that sort of defense, it keeps you in any game, whether you can score or not. But the Jazz they can score at times. I know the knock on them is that they can't score. If you take out the last game of the season, which they just lost Wednesday night in Portland for the 3 seed, they went on a 6-game winning streak before that. In those 6 games, their scoring totals were 107, 121, 117, 117, 112, and 119. Their lowest scoring game in that streak of 6 games was 107. And when you look at the Thunder defensively, they fell off a cliff when Andre Robertson went down with that season-ending injury. And they just don't lock in defensively for large stretches. They might do it for 2 minutes here, 3 minutes there, but they do not put together long stretches of consistent defense. And I think conversely, Oklahoma City on offense, they are very predictable. They run a lot of just high ball screens. They take a lot of poor jump shots. Really, their best offense is when they can get Steven Adams in the pick and roll and then rolling hard, and the big commits to Russ, and they can throw those lobs. But I just think when you take as many tough jumpers as they do, and you're playing the number 1 rated defensive team in the NBA, I just cannot see this being an easy series victory for Oklahoma City. So like I said, I have them in 7 on sheer star power of Russell on his home court in a 7th game. So now that we've hit on the 8 series, 4 in the West, 4 in the East, let's just give an overarching bold prediction about round 1. It can be a player prediction. It can be a team prediction. Just something that jumps out to you as you're not saying it's going to happen, but you wouldn't be surprised, and it's bold and it's out there, starting with Alexander.
I think my bold prediction for the first round of the playoffs is that we're going to see something from Giannis that we have never seen before. I think Giannis is going to find a new fold of his game, or really take his game to another level, with the heightened importance of these games. And I think, what he's been doing all year has been incredible, and he's really shown himself to be a top 10 player this season, the way he's carried Milwaukee. But I think we're going to see another level in the playoffs for Giannis.
So
young.
let's get you out there on a limb. So, I mean, are we talking he's going to average a triple double for this series, or what's the next level for a guy who already puts up eye-popping numbers?
I won't necessarily think he'll average a triple double because I don't think Milwaukee has enough offense for him to be able to dish out assists like that and to get his guys rolling. But I think we'll see multiple 40-point performances throughout the series. I think he could go 45 plus for multiple games.
All right, I like that. That is bold, but I like it. Giannis stepping up to have multiple 40-point games. I like that a lot. Okay, John, what about you? Bold prediction about anything, any player, any team round one.
I'm actually going to stick in the same series, but I'm going to flip to the other side of things. I'm going to say Jason Tatum, who obviously is a great rookie. I believe he averaged just under 14 points per game on the year. But I think in this series, he averages above 24 points per game in the series. I think not only because he has to, but because he's going to be able to raise his game to another level versus this Bucks defense. But yeah, he's going to have to load a lot of the offense, and I think he's up to the task.
Interesting. Okay. And for my bold prediction, I'm going to say that the best two players on the floor in the Pelicans-Blazers series are Anthony Davis and Drew Holiday. I do not think that Damian Lillard or C.J. McCollum will, throughout the course of that series, outplay both Drew and Anthony Davis. So I think the Pelicans in that series, they get the two best players. So let's move on now, and we're just quickly. I'm gonna go through my all NBA teams, and then I want you guys to critique and analyze and sort of debate what you like and what you don't like about these. So on my first team, all NBA, I've got Westbrook, Harden, LeBron, Giannis, and Anthony Davis at center. Second team, I've got Damian Lillard, DeRozan, Kevin Durant, LaMarcus Aldridge, and Joel Embiid. And before I get to my third team, because I don't want to overload you guys on names, what do you think about Russ, Harden, LeBron, Giannis, and Anthony Davis as first team All-NBA?
Personally, I like Durant above Giannis. I think his impact was carried out a lot of the year. He stepped his game up on the defensive side, and once again, one of the greatest offensive players we've ever seen had another great offensive year. So I think just his impact this year far outweighs what Giannis did for the Bucks, being the 7 seed with that much talent.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. Alexander, what about you? Do you have a thought on? I know that the two things that stick out to people are definitely the Giannis versus Durant, and the Russell Westbrook versus Damian Lillard. Do you have thoughts on either of those?
I'm usually pretty critical. I'm usually pretty critical of Russell, and I love Damian Lillard, but I think it's kind of crazy that Russell Westbrook quietly averaged a triple-double this season. No one was really talking about it until basically the last week of the season, where people were trying to find out how many more rebounds Russell needed to get in every game, to average the triple-double. So, looking at what Damian has done, especially in the second half of the season after All-Star break, has been incredible. But I just think the way that Russell has kind of had to deal with things, dealing with the inconsistencies that Paul George has had this season, and losing Robertson, and really how washed up Melo has looked for most of the season, it's still crazy that he was able to average a triple-double. And his scoring did go down, but compared to last season, he was the first player in NBA history to lead the league in scoring from one season, and then to lead the league in assists the following season.
Yep.
And that was vice versa with James Harden, too. Last year, James Harden led the league in assists, and this year he led the league in scoring.
Yep.
So, a few weeks ago, I maybe would have put Damian Lillard ahead of Russell just because of the insane hot streak the Blazers are going on. But for Russell to quietly average a triple-double and kind of, finish out this season and really push Oklahoma City to the playoffs, because there was a realistic possibility that Oklahoma City could have missed the playoffs.
Absolutely.
The past week of the regular season, depending on matchups and how everything went. So for Russell to really hunker in and finish the season off in literally will Oklahoma City, to the 4 seed, to the 5 seed. but it's really impressive, and I just have to put that edge over Dame.
And you don't have a problem with Giannis over KD, or do you have a problem with that as well?
No, I think I'm obviously biased for Giannis because I'm Greek, but just seeing how he elevated his game, he really developed a legitimate post game, and his defense is still improving, and his rebounding has been there. KD has done a lot of great things this season, especially stepping up on defense and averaging like almost 2 blocks a game. He may be over that, I'm not sure, but I just have to put Giannis right over there just because I don't think many people expected this from him this early. I think people saw what he did last year. Starting in the All-Star game, they saw him in the playoffs, and him being this young, we didn't really know how he would develop. So I don't think a lot of people thought he would develop into this quickly.
Yeah, no, that's.
So I got to put Giannis there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And back to the Westbrook versus Lillard comparison. I know when I first mentioned that 3 or so weeks ago, you had a lot of people saying, you got to go with Lillard. He's having a better season. He's more efficient, and more importantly, and most importantly to them, the Blazers, just the winning was the great separator. My thing is, and let me just give the numbers real quick. Damian Lillard this season, 27 points, 6.5 assists, 4.5 rebounds. Russell Westbrook, 25 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. But what I was going to say is, I definitely, winning is the name of the game. Absolutely, winning is the name of the game. But I use winning and I use record as a tiebreaker. If two things are close, I use it as a tiebreaker. So 25, 10, and 10, and 27, 6.5, 4.5 isn't a tie to me. It's not on a level playing field to me. So that's why I leave Russ on that first team. But even if you can convince me, even if I grant people that Russ and Lillard's numbers are equal, and that we have to go to winning, at the end of the day, Lillard is the 3 seed, Russell is the 4 seed. So I don't even see that as a great differentiator when it's all said and done. So I just think that Russell's numbers and the fact that the winning wasn't like a 2 seed versus a 7 seed. I just think that you have to keep Russell's numbers on the first team. I don't think you can have a guy average a triple-double and say he's not the best, one of the 2 best guards. Harden's definitely the other guard on the first team, but not one of the 2 best guards. And then on my third team, I had Curry. I gave him the spot because when he was in the lineup, he performed at his, historic levels that we've come to expect. Oladipo as my 2 guard on the third team All-NBA. Forwards, Paul George and Jimmy Butler. And third team center, Nikola Jokic. I don't think you guys are going to have a problem with Curry, Oladipo, George, and Butler. So what I do want to ask is your thoughts on how the center position shakes out on the All-NBA teams. You have Anthony Davis, which is, it's tough to keep him. He'll be first team. But then you have Embiid. You have Jokic, who had just a monster season. And then you have Rudy Gobert. And you're going to have to, and even Al Horford and Steven Adams to a lesser degree. But who do you guys think gets left off of those 3 All-NBA teams? John, I'll start with you.
Well, Anthony Davis is definitely a lock. He'll probably be on the first team, and well-deservingly so. Joel Embiid definitely deserves a spot. And then the third is really where things come up to, things start to shake out. I personally would go Rudy Gobert. Definitely see the case being made for Nikola Jokic. But just the fact that, like you guys were saying in the series with the Jazz, they were the 20th defensive team, and then Gobert comes back. They go on that incredible run. Move up to they finish at 5 seed, and Gobert, the defensive player of the year. But his impact is just incredible on the Jazz, going up to the first in defensive rating in all of the NBA. So I would personally vote him third team. I think Horford does deserve some votes.
And sorry to cut you off, John. And I completely whiffed on Karl Anthony Towns was the other guy I had written down. So you really have, Horford, Karl Anthony Towns, Gobert, Jokic, Embiid, and Anthony Davis. But continue.
Yeah, Towns definitely also, but again, I would stick with Gobert. Jokic deserves some votes. Horford deserves some votes. Towns deserves some votes. But Davis, Embiid, and Gobert would be my three.
All right, Alexander, what about you? Do you agree that Davis, Embiid, and Gobert are the three, or do you think Jokic did enough this season, or maybe even Karl Anthony Towns?
I think I'm going to put in Jokic in that All-NBA 13 spot. To do what he did this season with Denver, especially with Paul Millsap being out most of the season with that broken hand, him carrying the offense, and really quietly, he averaged the most assists for the third most assists for a center in NBA history this season at 6 points. So I didn't really see enough from Towns to really warrant giving him that spot, especially with his scoring and rebounding going down. And not really seeing much development outside of his scoring ability, because I think he did improve a lot. He definitely became a better shooter, but I haven't seen anything from him defensively for him giving him that spot. And although you can say the same thing for Jokic, how he's a liability on defense, but to just carry Denver's offense like he's been doing all season, especially without his second best player, Millsap, being there, I'm going to have to go with Jokic.
Yeah, and that was tough for me too. Like I said, I did have Jokic as my third-team All-NBA center, but it is tough. I think that Davis, Embiid, Jokic, Cat, and Gobert are definitely top five, and those are the ones who should be argued about, and then honorable mentions to Al Horford and Steven Adams. But it really is. It's just personal preference, I think, when it comes down to that third spot. I think that Jokic and Gobert both have a huge impact on their teams, and it's just what you like more. Gobert doesn't have the eye-popping numbers that Jokic does, and you can say that the Nuggets' offense would have just completely crumbled without Jokic, but you could also say that the Jazz wouldn't be where they are without Gobert, his defensive impact, his ability to take them from the 20s in defense to first overall. So, I think it's really, I don't think you can go wrong with Jokic or Gobert. I just think it's, do you have an affinity for offense and the impact Jokic had on the Nuggets offense and giving them a playoff run? Or do you tend to lean that, the Jazz would be nowhere without Rudy Gobert's defensive impact? So, it's great banter, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more when those All-NBA teams are published. But I think that'll wrap it up for today, fellas. I appreciate you both joining me for this conversation. And maybe we can, do this again before round 2.
Definitely. Sure.
All right, guys. Thanks. We'll talk to you later.